Hello, and welcome to this month's synth tutorial with computer music. This month, we're going to be using the Zebra CM plugin to create a really commercial and punchy bass patch. So grab yourself a copy of the Zebra CM, plug it into your DAW, and let's get stuck in. We'll begin by initializing the plugin. So we go to the window or the upper display at the top of the plugin, click and come down to where it says Init at the bottom. This will default the entire plugin. Unfortunately, this also defaults the master volume of the plugin, and this patch is going to be relatively loud. So go down to the master volume, which is on the bottom right-hand corner of the plugin, click and hold, drag the mouse down until you see a value of 50 in the upper display. And it's worth noting that anytime we make any alterations to pots or values on screen, you'll see those values represented in the display above. We'll begin the actual creation of our patch with oscillator number 1. By default, the volume is set to 100, and we're going to leave that where it is. However, we do want to make an alteration to the waveform display itself. So click and hold on the wave, drag the mouse upwards until you see a value in the upper display of 4.40. This gives us a relatively resonant waveform which sounds like this. But we're going to do a little bit of thickening by firstly applying some aliasing, which we do in the upper left-hand corner here. By pressing the 4 button, we then get 4 duplicated waveforms, all playing one on top of another. This does unfortunately mean that they are likely to phase. So in order to thicken up the texture, we're going to detune them using the detune pot. So we click and hold on this, and we drag this up to a value of +12. And now it's much thicker and detuned as a consequence. Next, we'll move over to oscillator number 2. And first thing we need to do is turn the volume up. So let's turn the volume up to 104. It's just a little bit louder than oscillator 1. In order to counteract the slightly lightweight feel of oscillator number 1, we're going to use something which is a little bit more bass friendly as a waveform on oscillator 2. We're going to use a square wave, and we'll find a square wave by changing the waveform value until we see a value of 2.0 at the top. We'll also add some wave aliasing at this stage as well, but just to the power of 2 on this occasion, and also we'll induce some detuning again to a value of 6. We should now hear a sound like this. Next, we're going to move over to the filter section, and this is the component which is really going to colour the sound more than any other component we work with here. There are lots of filters within the Zebra CM, and you can try them all to see which one suits your purpose. However, we really like the one which is called LP Vintage, partly because it's a low-pass filter, but also partly because it has a slightly vintage flavour, and it also means that we have access to an overdrive control. So having selected the vintage filter type from the drop-down menu, we now need to change our cutoff pot to a value of 59. We're also going to use the user-assigned pot, which has currently got envelope 2 written underneath it. We want to leave it in the envelope 2 state, but we do want to add a value here, so click and hold on the pot and drag that up to a value of 62. Finally, we're going to induce a little bit of overdrive, so turn up the drive pot to a value of 61. We'll now be hearing a sound like this. Next, we'll turn our attention to the envelope section. Beginning with envelope number 1, which is the envelope which is charged with controlling the volume aspect or amplitude of our sound, we're going to leave the attack, decay and sustain pots exactly where they are, but we're going to make a slight adjustment to the release pot, just drag that up to a value of 20. Envelope 2, as we've already seen, is heading in the direction of the filter, and this is actually modulating the cutoff control, so we need to make a few little alterations here. We'll leave the attack pot set to 0, we'll change the decay pot to a value of 29, we'll set the sustain pot to a value of 0, and finally the release pot to a value of 15, which should be the default. This means that we hear a sound like this. That concludes the actual creation of the synth patch itself, but the last part of the equation is really to add some compression, and there are several different types of compressor that you can use. Many of the more vintage-styled or modelled compressors, such as the two that we're seeing on screen here, will induce a degree of bottom-end presence. This is in part due to the actual makeup of the compressors themselves. However, it's really useful when you're using them on basses because it helps to add that extra definition to the bottom end. We're using two in tandem here. We're using the SSL valve comp, partly because it's relatively speedy in its control of knocking dynamics down, but we're also using the Universal Audio LA2 compressor, which has always been a bit of a favourite for basses. Put the two together, you'll end up with the most fantastic thick bass texture. So that's it for this month. We'll see you next time.